If you do put this boundary in place, what do you have to lose? What do you have to gain? I'm joined today by my dear friend and colleague, Jackie Gilde, licensed clinical social worker. And today we're going to be discussing boundaries, particularly how it's gone from a clinical tool to a buzzword, whether it's being used appropriately and safely. Is it being misinterpreted or misused? And what our perspective is on boundaries today and their future.
As a therapist, I fully support boundaries. I'm very boundaried myself, but you have to know when to have them on and turn them off.
But I've seen boundaries used appropriately, correctly, wisely, and I've also seen them thrown around inappropriately, and at times potentially even gaslighting.
That is a very healthy thing to do, is when somebody is not respecting my lines and what I need in place, it's okay to say no, and it's okay to put those boundaries in place.
This episode of Candid Minds with Dr. T and Friends is brought to you by Mindful Care.
Welcome back to another episode of Candid Minds with Dr. T and Friends. I am Dr. Tamir Aldad, addiction psychiatrist and the CEO of Mindful Care. I'm joined today by my dear friend and colleague, Jackie Gilde, licensed clinical social worker. And today we're going to be discussing boundaries, particularly how it's gone from a clinical tool to a buzzword, whether it's being used appropriately and safely. Is it being misinterpreted or misused? And what our perspective is on boundaries today and their future. So thank you for joining us, Jackie. I'm excited to be unpacking this topic with you, as I think everyone now knows what boundaries are and uses the term, but I've seen boundaries used appropriately, correctly, wisely, and I've also seen them thrown around inappropriately, and at times potentially even gaslighting, masquerading as a boundary. So what has your experience been like with boundaries?
So I think we started to see an uptick in people really using the word boundaries after COVID. I think COVID gave people a taste of life that they really liked. They liked being able to be home. They liked to have that flexibility in their schedule, work-life balance. But I also think that in certain settings, it's just not really that practical, right? And so as a therapist, I fully support boundaries. I'm very boundaried myself, but you have to know when to have them on and turn them off. And I think that people have started to define resistance as boundaries. I won't do this. I can't do this. There's lists of things that go on. And I think you're seeing it a lot more in the workplace, where it starts to become a deterrent. It starts to become, is this a boundary? Or like you said, or is this gaslighting? Right. And so I'm not somebody that typically pushes people's boundaries. I like to be respectful of them, as I expect people to be respectful of mine. And I think boundaries could be a great thing, particularly for people who've grown up maybe in homes where there's been enmeshment or an array of different things that they need to have things in place for themselves as well as for the people around them. But I personally do feel that we're kind of pushing the tad bit.
Yeah. How do you feel culturally it changes? Because I know I've seen, as we're navigating boundaries, a lot of the younger generation might have parents from an older generation, or their first generation, their parents came here from a different country, and now they're introducing the term boundary while parents find it completely foreign. Have you seen a trend in that direction where there's some resistance from older generations or other cultures to the concept of setting a boundary?
I think that it's the level of understanding of it. It's interesting we're even talking about this, as I was driving on my way here, and I talk about often that my mom worked very hard growing up, right? But I have started to create boundaries in my own life and even in my workplace because of her experience. And so I don't think as it was as acceptable for maybe our parents to create boundaries the way that some of us have been able to. And so in a good way, right? In a way of like, listen, I don't want to work 9 to 12 a.m. every day, right? And I remember her just working whenever she had to and never saying no, and being very uncomfortable to even take off even though she had time, because she felt this responsibility and this level of ownership that I respected and has helped me become the employee that I am today. But also have learned, because she has highlighted, like, make sure that It's not all the time. Make sure you have time for your kids. I wasn't able to, but if you can, do that. And so it depends. I think it's when the boundary goes towards the parent that doesn't understand. And so, through therapy, a lot of patients start to identify some unhealthy habits within their families, or maybe in their where they lie in their family, what transpires, and learning to create boundaries with people who are going to push and don't understand what you're trying to do. And there's this quote that's like, people love you until you create boundaries with them. And I think that that could be a twofold, right? But it also could be very true, is that sometimes you are taken advantage of. Sometimes you have people who push too much. Sometimes you have people in your life who are not supporting you the way that they should. And when you start to boundary those people and start to put some rules in place, you get a very strong reaction. And I think that that's very telling. I do think, though, that a lot of times for older parents who don't have that understanding, their reaction is not to be harmful or abusive. It's really this lack of understanding that you've always done things this way. Why are you changing now? You've always come and done everything for me. Why can't you help me now? And can some of those people be taking advantage? Absolutely. I don't know your case, but I do see that it's really that there's a educational piece that doesn't always go so well, and it can be very timid, and it can be exhausting for the person trying to set the boundary because it's not being received. But if it is, it also can be a space where there's just happiness and healthiness for the individual. And a lot of times when people feel that they need to be boundaries, it's because lines have been crossed. And that is a very healthy thing to do, is when somebody is not respecting my lines and what I need in place, it's okay to say no, and it's okay to put those boundaries in place.
Absolutely. One thing I encourage people to do when assessing boundary placement is to evaluate risk. If you do put this boundary in place, what do you have to lose? What do you have to gain? What could possibly be the worst outcome?
Right.
What will be the best outcome? And many times when you do that exercise, you realize that you're not going to lose much.
Right.
They will likely reschedule. I can think of an example just last week. I was talking to someone who was asked to run a bunch of errands, and they felt like they were being pushed beyond their comfort zone. And we talked about it, and I explained to them that nothing's going to happen if you just do what you can, and tell them that I did the most I could do.
Right.
It'd be very unusual if they hold that against you. If you said, I gave you 3 hours of my time, that was the most I could do that day, nothing's going to happen. They're still going to be there the next day, and they're still going to love you, and everything's going to be fine. So kind of doing that risk assessment is really helpful, because I think a lot of people catastrophize that if I tell my boss, I'm sorry, I can't stay late, even though I don't have childcare, I might get fired. Will you really get fired, though, that if you explain that you don't have childcare and you can't stay late today at work? Or is it likely that your boss will be reasonable and appreciate that and understand that, right? So thinking through those scenarios is really helpful. On the flip side, though, I have seen a lot of aggressive boundary setting by some individuals. Yeah. There is an Instagram channel of this young woman who demonstrates how to push back against your boss. I don't know if you've seen this, where you tell your boss, I'm sorry, that's not in my job description, or I'm sorry, that exceeds the amount of hours I'm supposed to work a week. And it's like these like nasty things that constantly she encourages people to tell their employer.
Does she pay their bills when they lose their job?
Right.
Right?
Like how, I mean, I would really exercise caution before implementing some of those recommendations.
And to be honest, even a lot of workplaces are very understanding of boundaries, but appropriate ones. And that's where I think this is getting dangerous. Is I think I'm going to get crucified for saying this, but I think a lot of younger generations are using the word as boundaries as a term of like, I will or will not do that. I can't even tell you how many interviews I've had where people rattle off a list of the JD of things that they won't do in the JD. Well, unfortunately, then you're not going to get the job. This is what we're presenting. This is the salary we're presenting, the benefits. So I think you also can start to corner yourself where you're then limiting your opportunities. Granted, if it's really a job that you don't want, that's okay. Then you don't go to the interview though, right? And so we're starting to say these are my boundaries after we've accepted a position, signed a contract for a position, and have a job description, and then suddenly well, I don't want to do those things. And we're not talking grievous things. We're not talking about anything out of the ordinary. And I think that that's what's getting dangerous is we're titling things as boundaries when it's just resistance and not willingness to do it. And there's a huge difference. And so, as an employee, as a supervisor, I encourage people to have boundaries. I encourage you to take care of yourself. But there's a fine line between I won't do my job and this is a boundary.
What would you say if you're thinking of setting a boundary, you should be looking for within yourself as a sign that a boundary is necessary?
I think a boundary is necessary based off of how you're feeling, right? So do I feel exhausted around this person? Do I feel like I'm being taken advantage of? Do I feel like I'm being asked to do something that I'm not comfortable doing? Have I spoken to this person numerous times about this issue and they're still not respecting it? I do a lot of work with younger women, not younger, but adult women who maybe are new moms. And that can be a very challenging time where you do have to set boundaries with people who are now seeing you in a new light. You're a new mom. Your emotions are all over the place, right? Your hormones are all over the place. And I could think of one specific instance where the mother-in-law was being quite a bit, and she kept asking her, please don't kiss the baby on the lips. Please don't take the baby in the middle of the night when he's sleeping. Please don't do these things. And she just was not listening. And she had to create a boundary of, you can't come to my home unless you are announced that you're coming. We have to take your key away now. And it was very uncomfortable for her. One, it was a person she loved and respected quite a bit. But two, it was months and months. I'm talking almost a year into being a new mom that her whole experience had been taken from her. This new chapter of her life had been so poorly impacted by this experience and by this lack of boundaries on both ends that she got to a place where she just couldn't do it. And I would encourage you not to let it get that far, right? And to identify things from the get-go, communicate with people. I also will tell you that there are just people that do not respect boundaries. And you may be left to make a decision of, can this person be in our life if they don't respect our boundaries? And what I will tell you is a lot of people sometimes have to tell people, you cannot be in our life anymore because we've tried to set this boundary with you. We've told you cannot do these things and you're not able to respect it.
Absolutely. And one way to communicate boundaries is through assertive communication.
Yes.
To really make sure the person understands what is going on, why you're doing what you're doing, and not just out of nowhere saying, give me your key.
Right.
They really have making
There's
sure.
things that lead up to the boundary being set. There's almost warning signs.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't do this, this is what the result is going to be. Okay, remember we had this conversation. This is what the result is going to be. But what I think, though, is if I'm not an assertive person, if I'm not a confrontational person, the thought of setting a boundary would put me over the edge.
Exhausting.
I'm not somebody that likes to communicate. That's not who I really am. But, I'm not somebody that likes to communicate. I don't have a big personality. Working with people like that, it's such an internal struggle to get them to, that they sometimes just avoid the person at home.
Yeah.
Because having that conversation and setting that boundary in general that's their way of setting the boundary. It's just cutting off communication because they've been pushed to such a point, and it's just not in their nature to have those conversations.
Yeah. And if you're kind of if you fear confrontation and you don't like conflict, it gets,
if it's culturally not acceptable.
yeah, that's another one.
We can't forget that not everybody grew up in homes where they were empowered to really speak up for themselves and to advocate. Not everybody grew up in homes that they could sit next to their parent. Everybody comes from an array of different backgrounds, and really knowing as a clinician who you're talking to. And as a friend, you can go and tell somebody you need to set a boundary. You have to really understand how impactful that boundary could be and what is that going to look like for the individual.
Yeah. The not, avoiding conflict is an interesting one. Yesterday I was at CVS, and some woman was trying to pay and having a very hard time to finding her credit card or something. So the cash register person started helping the next person. And the woman who was looking for her credit card started yelling at the cash register lady saying, you were helping me. Why are you moving on to the next person? And then some guy in line started yelling, and it was like, how dare you talk to her like that? And then another person in line said, why are you getting involved? We're in line. And then someone asked me, well, what do you think is, and I'm like, all right, guys, I have no clue what's going on. I paid. And this has nothing to do with me.
Right.
And I will be leaving now. And then as I left, I actually was thinking to myself, like, was I like avoiding conflict? Or should I also have given my opinion?
Right.
But it was just interesting to see this dynamic of everyone trying to defend. Some people defended the cash register lady, some people defended the woman who was paying, some defended the next, and there were like 4 or 5 people in this. The manager came in as I was leaving.
Well, you essentially set a boundary. I'm not getting involved in this. I don't know what's going on, and I'm out of here.
Yeah,
right?
I was like, I got my batteries. That's all I really wanted.
That's all I wanted.
Not sure y'all figure this out, but
I will tell you where I really can appreciate the word boundary and the ability to create boundaries, and what they're teaching young women and kids in general is body boundaries. I remember, as a kid, you were expected to kiss and hug every single person that was in the room. It was considered disrespectful if you didn't. And now there's been this movement of like, don't force your child to kiss somebody that they don't want to. Don't force them to hug somebody that they don't want to. I just talked to you about my 2-year-old son. I plays this song that he sings about boundaries, and it talks about it's my body and it's not to insult you, but it's how I feel. And I think for a long time, children were shamed. Like, no, you go kiss them. It's your aunt. Well, a lot of the times things happen with people that children know the most. Sure. And so I think that movement, I really am very supportive of. I really can appreciate that at a young age, they're teaching them that. I appreciate the song that they're even playing with them and helping them to understand that it's okay that that person may feel uncomfortable because you're telling them this, but you don't have to make yourself uncomfortable and feel away because you're too afraid of what this person is going to feel. And putting yourself first, essentially, it's my body and I don't like that. And it's okay for them to say that. And I really appreciate that. And really with my own kids, I read that, kids are very interesting when they're off, and to push them and make them do something that they're really not comfortable teaches them something that I don't think we're really trying to teach them this day and age.
Oh, absolutely. Do you think if someone's contemplating setting a boundary, there is an appropriate timing, meaning should you try first to accommodate the person, but then if it gets excessive, then set the boundary? If you can predict that it's going to get excessive, set the boundary, wait until it's exhausting, and then when do you think's the right time if you're questioning a dynamic in a relationship?
I think it depends on the severity of what's going on, right? It's the severity. It's how instant do I need this to change? It's the impact of it. Because then again, too, I have seen, again, another person I had worked with that were so boundaried when it came to their kids that was almost realistic, that it was like, well, is this a boundary? You just don't want this grandmother in their life, because there's a difference. And so again, not hiding behind boundaries, and utilizing at times where it's very convenient. I don't want this person here now, but when I need a sitter, I want them here. For me, it's really when it starts to be impactful. When you feel like I'm uncomfortable, have that conversation right away. Don't let it get to the point that it distresses you and that it causes this big this big fallout. Have the conversation, communicate, but also know the people in your life. Not everybody is going to respond to you communicating with them. Not everybody is going to respond to you trying to create the boundary. And you do hear that a lot too. She don't understand. My mom doesn't respect boundaries. She doesn't have them herself. Right. I could tell her this, but it's going to fall. She's not going to listen to me.
Or she'll be very defensive.
She'll be defensive. This is going to cause a big fight that I don't really want to have. And so making changes that work for you and that you really need to have, setting the boundary when you know it will work and that you're going to stick to it. Because that's another thing. Saying you're setting this boundary and this is the way it needs to be, and then not holding the person to it, they're never going to respect you or follow through because you're not expecting them to. But I love boundaries. I'm a very boundary person. But I do think it's being overused and abused. Yeah. But I also think that there are people who it's not in their nature to respect, and it's not in their nature to provide a boundary. And that can be very challenging to have to accept and navigate.
Absolutely. I would also encourage people to make sure they're setting the boundary with the correct person. A lot of times I see people responding to previous experiences, yes, and now prematurely setting a boundary with the new person. So if a guy was dating a girl and the relationship was toxic for one reason or another, now the new person is getting boundaries, yes, based on someone else's behavior. Really kind of having a fresh set of eyes looking at a situation and having that insight to assess, are you responding to this specific situation, or are you displacing anger you have towards someone else or something else, and now setting boundaries in a new dynamic?
You also see that in families where you place the boundary on the safer person. So my mom is normally the safe one. She normally does respect boundaries and she will make sure that my dad does. So I'm really angry with my dad. I really don't like how he's going about things, but I'm not going to communicate with him because he's not safe. I'm going to give my mom the hard time about it. And I'm going to tell my mom she can't see her grandkids. And I'm going to tell my mom all these rules of what it's going to be, all because of somebody else. That's not fair either, is holding somebody else accountable for someone else's behaviors. It's okay to say, listen, you and dad are not going to be able to come over together if he keeps acting like this or if he keeps drinking or whatever the case is. But holding one person accountable and creating a boundary because of somebody else is not fair and is not necessarily going to work. It can be very damaging.
Absolutely. And I agree with everything you're saying. I think using boundaries responsibly is important, assessing situations to make sure that they are really having a negative impact, that you're not just being resistant, but you are really protecting yourself, will lead to wise decision making. So excellent conversation. Always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me. To our viewers, we look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Thank you.